Welcome. My name is Leah Justin-Jinich. I'm a PhD candidate studying Japanese art and literature at Harvard University, and I am a graduate student intern this year for the Harvard Art Museums. I will be your guide on this virtual tour of Painting Edo, Japanese art from the Feinberg Collection. In this focus tour, we will explore 3 paintings in the exhibition that depict the highest and most sacred peak in Japan, Mount Fuji, in different ways. Although its almost perfectly cone-shaped peak has been revered as a sacred site since at least the 8th century, Mount Fuji gained a new prominence in Japan's early modern Edo period, spanning from 1615 to 1868. One reason for this was its location just west of the new shogunal capital of Edo. Its peak was said to have been visible from any point in the city, and its daily appearance in Edo citizens' lives reinforced their strong connection with the mountain. As domestic travel increased throughout the Edo period, the site of Mount Fuji became a highlight on the journey on the Great Highway along the eastern seaboard, the Tokaido Road, that connected Edo to the imperial capital of Kyoto. Mount Fuji has been written about with reverence for well over 1,000 years. Its peak, at over 12,000 feet, or almost 4,000 meters, is awe-inspiring. But it is important to note that for all of its soaring and apparently timeless beauty, it remains an active volcano. The last major eruption occurred in 1707, during the early Edo period, and it continues to be closely monitored by volcanologists today. The name of the peak can be written in several different ways. The Chinese characters now conventionally used to write Fuji translate to abundant mountain. In the pre-modern era, however, a variety of different combinations of homophonous characters were used to write Fuji, including peerless and deathless. Mount Fuji has conventionally been depicted as a snow-covered cone, in part because the peak is so high, it is, in fact, blanketed in snow for most of the year. Its portrayal is guided by famous classical poetry and literature that celebrates this feature. In this double-sided folding fan by Suziki Kitsu, Mount Fuji is cleverly shown in different aspects on both sides of the fan. On one side, Fuji's snow-capped peak rises into the brilliant azurite blue sky. The snow line is defined by a silvery M-shaped shadow beneath the summit, while the base is touched with golden mist, perhaps indicating the first touches of the sun's rays as dawn breaks. When the fan is turned around, it reveals another image of Fuji. This time, the iconic white peak rises into a glorious golden sky, possibly at sunset. The snow line is defined by 2 deep blue peaks below. The painter has taken advantage of the translucency of the fan paper to portray not 1, but 2 sacred mountains on this luxurious fan. The M-shaped blue peaks are, in fact, the profile of Mount Tsukuba, another sacred mountain located close to Edo, to the northeast of the city. Why would these 2 mountains be paired? Part of the reason may be related to an ancient legend in which 2 gods, Izanami and Izanagi, descended from the heavens. They made the islands of Japan from the brine that dripped off a jeweled spear that they thrust repeatedly into the water below. They then wanted to rest on the land, and asked both Mount Fuji and Mount Tsukuba for shelter. Mount Fuji was proud of its perfect shape and scorned the gods and their blessings, while Mount Tsukuba graciously gave them food, water, and rest. As a result, Mount Fuji is cold and barren, while Mount Tsukuba is lush and colorful. Since the 2 gods were, respectively, female and male, the 2 tall peaks of Mount Tsukuba are today called Nyotai-san, the female body, and Nantai-san, the male body. Together, Mount Fuji, west of Edo, and Mount Tsukuba, to the northeast, form a protective geomantic cordon around the city. By cleverly integrating both mountains into one double-sided painting, its creator suggests the fictive viewing position of anyone holding the fan is, in fact, the city of Edo itself, safeguarded by the two sacred peaks by which it is surrounded. Our second view of Mount Fuji also plays with materiality, not pigment and paper translucency, as in the case of Kitsu's fan, but through the deliberate deployment of unpainted space. This monochromatic painting by Takada Kehoe is painted on paper using only ink, diluted to various shades. The ethereal Mount Fuji is formed in the negative. In order to articulate the mountain, Kehoe left the shape of the peak in reserve and painted around it using subtle gradations of ink wash to complete the composition. The white highlights in the painting are, in fact, passages of unpainted paper. The monochrome Mount Fuji was a hallmark composition of a powerful painting academy called the Kano School. In Edo, the Kano were the official painters in attendance to the ruling shoguns. The Mount Fuji motif that you see here was standardized in the early Edo period and was an integral part of the formation of the Kano brand during the Edo period. The strategic placement of Mount Fuji left of center emphasizes the long descending slope to the right. The glowing white peak, surrounded by scalloped clouds, is imbued with an almost holy aura, fitting for a mountain that has long been revered as the residence of gods. As Buddhism took root in Japan, it came to be believed that Mount Fuji was the abode of an enlightened being, or bodhisattva, known as Sengen. Sengen was thought to be an avatar of the ultimate and supreme Buddha of the universe. The consciousness of Fuji as a sacred place grew exponentially in the Edo period, and by 1825, it is thought that as many as 70,000 people were registered as Fuji worshippers in cults known as Fujiko that venerated the mountain through ritual practices and pilgrimage. In this painting, there are, in fact, 3 famous sites, which became essential features of a Kano-style depiction of Mount Fuji: the monastery Seikenji, the Miho pine forest, and Mount Fuji itself. The Zen monastery of Seikenji is just visible beneath the scalloped clouds to the left. Several buildings with tiled roofs are nestled among trees that are built up with a series of repetitive brushstrokes, and the top 2 tiers of a pagoda jut up towards the sky. The temple has a significant history, but one important reason it became famous in the Edo period is that it was near the Tokaido Highway, so it was easy for travelers to visit. The body of water depicted in the foreground is Suruga Bay, which is to the south of Mount Fuji. In the lower right-hand corner is a stretch of seashore famous for its picturesque pines, called the Miho pine forest. This roughly 4.5-mile-long shoal is a famous site in classical and poetic imagination. I say pine forest, but you'll notice that the rapidly painted, rounded forms of the trees lack the angularity typical of pine trees. The artist is more portraying the idea of the topos, the site as it is understood in Japanese literature, rather than the actual site itself. These 3 sites, Mount Fuji, Seikenji, and the Miho pine forest, became closely associated in classical poetry and were often depicted together in paintings. Yet outside the poetic imagination, there is no spot from which all 3 can be seen simultaneously. The painter, Kehoe, overcomes this topographical difficulty by positioning us, the viewers, so that we hover over Suruga Bay. In reality, there would be no land mass to support our viewpoint, or our feet. This vantage is a God's eye view perspective. This impossible viewpoint further emphasizes the ethereal, otherworldly presence of the mountain, because even at this height it still towers overhead, far above the clouds, as if the peak is about to puncture the sky. this Mount Fuji is an idealized image that emphasizes the sacred status of this timeless topos. By contrast, this Mount Fuji, painted by Tani Buncho, implies a specific setting, not of Suruga Bay or the Miho pine forest, but of a different view of densely wooded hills near the summit. He captures the sense of the mountain as if we were personally encountering it. While Kehoe's Mount Fuji is a modest size, Buncho's is about as tall as many viewers. The mountain has a specific topographic texture generated by the artist's skillful application of ink. Lines of black ink, applied using a variety of different techniques, are built up to form the summit. Black ink is set down in measured strokes, making clear outlines. Nearby, only traces of ink are left after a drying brush is passed rapidly over the area, evoking the craggy skin of the mountain. Here, an especially wet second application of ink allows the layers to bleed together, as if the mountain is melding into the misty white band of clouds, partially obscuring the base of the peak. Like Kehoe, Buncho leaves part of the clouds and peak in reserve so that they appear brilliantly white. Repetitive, additive brushstrokes form the forest. Buncho also blurs part of the forest with an application of ink wash over the lines of the trees, and, again, by introducing wet ink to still drying patches of the forest, creating an ink-stained effect and giving the foliage a misty halo. We really get the sense of the humid atmosphere of the forest. Rising above this moist stratum, Mount Fuji is stark and clear in the thin air in the sky above. Mount Fuji is painted from a low vantage point and from a distance, as if we were a traveler walking towards the mountain and are stopped on a low hill. Several pathways at the mountain's base seem to be at a lower elevation than we are. Because the pathways are formed in the negative, they seem to glow as they are glimpsed through the dense foliage. And they invite our eye to travel up to the peak. This low perspective is quite different from the hovering vantage point of Kehoe's painting, in which we are positioned above Suruga Bay. Yet, we still feel the awe-inspiring power of the mountain as it looms large before and above us. The texture of the mountain evokes a sense of seeing the peak in the flesh and up close, as opposed to how the mountain might be seen with fewer details at a distance. This, as well as the work's low vantage point, denotes its status as a true view painting, or shinkeizu. True view painting is an amalgamation of details taken from sketches made from personal observation, such as Buncho in fact made in the region, and classical iconography, in this case, the conventionalized cone that was associated with Fuji in classical literature. The two are combined in this painting as a means of transmitting the essence of a famous place, conveying the emotional tenor of a particular subjective experience of a well-known topos. 2 years after he made this painting, Tani Buncho also created a 3-volume set of illustrated books entitled Illustrations of Famous Mountains in Japan, based on sketches he made while traveling in the area. In his depictions of Mount Fuji, we can see a perhaps even more effusive use of dense lines to create a sense of the mountain's topology. As you can see, Mount Fuji loomed large in the Edo period cultural imaginary for a variety of different reasons. Its status was rooted in classical poetry and lore and steeped in religious signification. As travel became more possible and popular in the Edo period, more people began to travel to see the peak personally. And artists such as Tani Buncho began to inflect their work with their own personal experiences of the mountain. Ubiquitous both in the skyline of Edo and in paintings of the Edo period, Mount Fuji was, and remains, abundant, deathless, and peerless. Thank you for joining me today on this virtual tour for the Harvard Art Museum's special exhibition, Painting Edo, Japanese Art from the Feinberg Collection.